What's up, Wargamers? Welcome back to World of Wargaming. I'm Isaiah, and today I invite you again to pull up a seat, grab a snack and a tasty beverage, and let me talk at you for a minute. And today, I'd like to talk at you about this game, Moonstone, by Tom Greenway from Goblin King Games. So first off, I just have to say that the art in this book is absolutely amazing. The miniature examples, things like this, wonderful imagination fuel. And then we also have, this, which is the illustrated style of the book. Lots of bright colors, absolutely beautiful. Now there are also a lot of kind of black and gray illustrations that look very much like sketches of the people on the page, but there's a lot of great character both to the art in the book, and this art style follows through really well into the actual models. That kind of cohesion is always appreciated. So Moonstone is a fantasy 2 to 4 player skirmish game with a heavy focus on the characters that you use and the lore of the game. A lot of this book is lore. There are big chunks of lore to help fill out the world and let you know what's going on and what's been going on. This book covers the core rules of the game and your basic rules for head-to-head play. It doesn't have the campaign system like for ongoing linked games. That is in a separate book. Now, due to the systems of the game, it does require some peripherals, which can be purchased, and I think they can also be printed out as PDFs, which is a very specific 21 card arcane deck and 18 card melee deck. And then your miniatures, obviously, and tokens. Each player only needs 1d6 because you use the cards for all the stuff. For the most part, we're going to call this a diceless game. So very much like Yasiga, or Yasiga is like it, in that aspect that they are both card-driven as opposed to dice-driven. And then you need some D4s to represent the actual moonstones, which is the goal. Usually the goal of the mission is to collect the most moonstones and have them for yourselves before the sun comes up. Because as we all learned from David the Gnome, supernatural creatures only come out at night to do their stuff. In this case, collect moonstones. And then the game jumps straight into setting up, or the book jumps straight into setting up for a game as opposed to going through the rules first. And I think that's fine. I think it's good once you've read through the rules, because then this is pretty much the first thing that you come to when you're ready to play. So it plays on a 3x3. When you place your terrain, you don't want to put it in the very center of the board. You want to leave it off that part. You choose your troops, which the troop is your collection of characters. There are 3 main factions. Commonwealth, which includes humans, giants, and gnomes. There is Dominion, which has goblins, fairies, and trolls. And there is the Leshevolt, which has fauns, spirits, and cultists. And then there are some some characters that are cross, so they can be used within either or situation. So they could be Commonwealth or Dominion, or Leshevolt and Commonwealth, or Leshevolt and Dominion. There are no points in the game when you're choosing your troop. It's just you get X number of characters that you get to pick. In a 2-player game, you get 6. In a 3-player game, you get 4. And in a 4-player game, you get 3. You then come to growing the moonstones, which are your objectives for the game. And this I really like. This is really fun to do, and it's good and proper random. So you take 7 D4s. You hold them between a foot and 16 inches over the very middle of the board, and then you drop them. And where they land, that's your objectives. Unless your opponent really doesn't like it, each player gets a mulligan, so your opponent can then scoop up the dice, drop them from the same height, and then if you, the original dropper, do not like that position, you can have a mulligan and redrop. But everybody gets 1 redrop, basically. I like that. That happened in the game that my friend Bill and I played, which will be the next video coming out after this one. You then move to deployment. I feel like this is a little bit more complex than it needs to be, but again, this is my opinion. It's not bad at all. It plays pretty smoothly after you do it 1 or 2 times, but it uses a lot of words that I don't know. Of course, everything uses words, but it uses a lot of. There's terminology is what I'm trying to say. There is terminology unique to this that you gotta commit to memory, and then you're good to go. So this is where you need that D6. Each player is going to roll that D6. The highest gets to choose to be the early bird or to have the initiative. The early bird gets to place the first model. The player with initiative gets to activate first in the first turn. You have to place a model wholly within 10 inches of your table edge that you choose. And then you go back and forth until it's done. When you get to the first turn of the first game, the player with the initiative will go first. After the first turn, it's a roll-off where the initiative player gets a bonus. A game is 4 turns. Now, if the winner is then the person who has the most moonstones at the end of those 4 turns, which represent the nighttime. So at the end of turn 4, the sun is rising and the moonstone crop is dissipating. However, if it is a tie, the game goes into a sudden death round, and at any point, if another player has more moonstones than the other, they automatically win. It doesn't finish the turn or anything. They just win immediately. I don't care for that much. In the game we played, we had a really, really, really good, just hard-fought game. And when it came to the sudden death round, it just felt... It was kind of a feel bad. I don't know. And it may just be that I'm new to it. And I'm going to keep playing the game like 100% because it was a lot of fun. But that aspect of it, I would rather it be a sudden death round and you play a whole round and then whoever has the most at the end of that round, or for it to just be a draw. As an avid fan of Arsenal football, I'm okay with a draw. Sometimes a draw is fine. Now your characters have cards. They look like this. Down at the very bottom of it, we have some blue dots. Those blue dots represent your energy that you have. And the whole array of dots represent your total wound pool. So as you take damage, you become less effective on the battlefield. I think that's a beautiful action economy. I really, 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 really like that part. And there's a lot of other parts that I like, but I really like how the action economy is directly tied to the number of wounds you've taken. So those blue dots are called energy. And at the beginning of the turn, the first thing that you're going to do is the replenish step, where you're going to put blue tokens on their card equal to the number of dots that they have, blue dots that they have remaining. We then move to the activation step, where we have on the first turn, player with initiative goes first. And as I mentioned earlier, on turn 2, they have a +2 to the roll. And on turn 3, they have a +1 to the roll. And on turn 4, it's even Stevens. A character may take as many actions as it like. You may repeat actions. Most of them. Most of the actions you can do more than once. Some of them you cannot. Some of them you won't be able to afford to do more than once. And again, the number of actions that you can perform is tied to the amount of energy, which is the blue dots at the bottom of the character card. Also on the character card, you will have abilities that character can perform, which will have an energy cost listed for them on the ability. But there are 7 standard abilities. You can step, which is 1 inch for 1 energy. You can jog for no energy, but you can only do it once per turn, and that is a movement up to 4 inches. If you're carrying a Moonstone, that gets cut in half to 2 inches. You can traverse, which costs you 2 energy, and represents you like jumping over an obstacle up to 1 inch, also like a fence or a barrow or a hay bale or something like that. You can harvest for 1 energy, and this is how you actually gather the Moonstones. So when the Moonstones get dropped, they're dice, they're D4s, they have a number showing. That number is how deep down that you got to dig to get that Moonstone up. So when you harvest, you lower the number on the dice of a Moonstone by 1, and if it's at 1, you just pick it up. That's a really fun mechanic. It works really, really well on the table, and it feels like, you know, I'm digging this thing up. It's a good mechanic. There's the active ability, which would be one of the things listed on your card. An arcane ability, again, listed on the individual character's card. And then a melee attack, which costs 1 energy and has a whole process that we're going to go through in a little bit. You do have to have line of sight to a model to interact with it, to target it. And you're drawing it from base to base. A model is engaged with any enemy model when it is within its melee ranges. Some people have a melee range of 1. Some people have a melee range of 3. So it is possible to be in a situation where you can hit them, but they cannot hit you because you are outside the range of their melee weapon. And that's another, it's a small thing, but it makes sense and it's implemented elegantly. We then come to arcane abilities, which I don't know how I'm going to be able to explain. I had to see this on the table for my brain to register what's going on. So you have this deck of arcane cards. It has green, blue, and pink cards. They look like this. So when you activate your arcane ability, you draw a number of those cards from the deck equal to your arcane stat. If your target has evade, that can modify you up or down, but you always get to draw at least 1 card. If the target is an enemy model, that model is known as the resisting model, and its controller draws 6 cards from the deck. If it is a friendly model, then the active player is the resisting player to the left. So even if you're trying to heal one of your own guys, there's still a chance that things can go horribly wrong, which is always fun with Magic systems. Unless something says otherwise, you can always use your arcane abilities. However, intervening models can potentially provide cover. Once everybody has a hand, the player casts using the ability. On the ability, it'll have some numbers that are in the 3 colors, green, blue, and pink. Your job as the casting player is to place down a card face down and declare it to be one of those colors and numbers, whatever your ability requires in order to be successful. Your opponent then gets to either say okay and just everything resolves and you don't have to show the card, or they can call bluff because they think you're lying. Maybe you draw that hand, but you don't have the card that you need for your spell. Like if you need a very specific one. For example, there's only 3 3s in the whole 21 card deck. 1 in each color. And if your spell needs one of those, there's a pretty high chance that maybe you didn't draw it. And so but you got to set a card down. So you tell a little lie and you hope you get away with it. If they catch you, they get to replace the card that you picked with something from their hand, which could be something like a catastrophe, which would usually cause damage to you or some other adverse effect, or just replace it with something that doesn't work. Something else that doesn't work so that the spell fizzles. If your opponent catches you telling the truth, however, you get to use that ability again for free, using the cards that you have left in your hand. And then you going through the same steps: bluff, okay, choice, and then you shuffle all the arcane cards back together. This was one of the hardest parts of the game for us, was remembering to shuffle all of the cards back into the deck. So make sure you're paying attention to that as you play. Next, we come into the rules for the terrain that is on the board. And this is real short, 2 pages. Open ground, no effect. Obstacles are the small things that you would need to use a traverse action over. Movement is next, and movement cannot move onto or through an obstacle, but you can move up to it and then use a traverse action to get over it. Line of sight is pretty basic. It's true line of sight, or to the base to base. Obstacles do not block line of sight, but they do provide cover from arcane abilities. Barriers are larger 3D pieces that you can't see through, like buildings and big clusters of trees, stuff like that. Your movement for a barrier is that you cannot move onto or through it during a jog, step, or traverse. It is straight up impassable terrain and completely blocks all line of sight. Water features cannot be jogged through, but you can take step actions to get through them. They have zero effect on line of sight. And then we have wooded patches, which our characters are inevitably going to encounter. You can't jog through them, you can step through them, you can shoot into them or out of them, but you can't shoot all the way through them. We then proceed to cover and how it works and what it does. There's two kinds, light and heavy. Light cover is if any of the lines from base to base go through an obstacle or another model's base. You get -1 to your hand size when you go to draw, to a minimum of 1. Heavy cover is the same, but it's from the center to the center. And it's -2 to a minimum of 1. Sometimes you may find yourself up on top of a piece of terrain with no good way down other than to jump. So when you do that, you take a step action, and then unless you're a fairy or you're falling into a water feature like a pond or a river or something, you're going to take some fall damage. If the fall is 0 to 2 inches, you take no damage. If it's 2 to 4, you take a quarter of your total health boxes rounding up. 4 to 6 is half, and 6 plus is just outright slain. You are dead and removed from play. You drop any moonstones that you happen to be carrying. Models can be removed from play, which is basically just like you got a moonstone, you're going to run it home. So you're just going to take that character off the board. They do not count as slain, and their moonstones that they were carrying count as secured. There are a couple of ways that you can activate outside of combat or use energy outside of activation. One is a go for it, which happens during melee combat, which we're going to get to in a minute. The other is a reaction step. So if you have energy on a model and when your opponent finishes an action, you can spend an energy to make a step action. So like you could use it to get behind cover or step out of engagement or things like that. So there's minimal opportunity. There's some opportunity to keep your opponent on their toes by knowing that you do have the option to do certain things after they do things. When it comes to the moonstones and the holding and the carrying of them, it's pretty straightforward. There's no limit to how many you can carry. You cannot, however, set them down voluntarily, but there are some abilities that can force models to pass moonstones to them. If a model is slain, the opponent gets to place them anywhere touching the base of the model. And then that model is removed at a depth value of 1, so they can just be picked up immediately. And as I mentioned earlier, when you're carrying moonstones, you have a -2 penalty to your jog actions. That's your free movement. So then we come to the melee combat, which is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. So there are 6 different cards in that deck. A falling swing, a high guard, a thrust, a sweeping cut, a rising attack, a low guard. And there are 3 different types of damage, I believe. Impact, slicing, and piercing. And your characters are going to usually want to do or not do certain types of damage based on the weapons that they have. Each one of the cards has a little chart on it that tells you how it interacts with whatever card your opponent plays. So when you go into melee, everybody draws cards equal to their melee stat plus or minus modifiers. And then the attacking character gets a +2 modifier. And then everybody lays their card down and you compare them. Then everybody lays their cards down and you compare whatever they lay down. So for example, if I play a falling swing and my opponent plays a sweeping cut, I'm going to look at my falling swing card and I'm going to look at sweeping cut, and I'm going to see that that says I deal 3 damage and I suffer 2 damage. And there's no saves or anything like that. Now on top of that, the way that you crit in the game is, so you got a hand of 5 cards, and I played that same falling swing. If I have more of those in my hand, I can lay them down on top of it. Both players can do this. And for each one of those, you add them all together. And then add, if you have modifiers or anything, but you add them all up. So like that fallen swing that dealt 3 damage, if I had 2 more of those in my hand, that would be 9 damage. That's more than most models in the game have. So it is possible to hit real hard sometimes. Some certain combinations of attacker and defender choices, when you look at that chart, there will be a yellow circle behind your number. That means that you get a follow-up attack. So you get to go at it again. And the book does really, really well with giving you good functional diagrams and examples of how these things work, where they've got, you know, full color illustrations, pictures of the cards and all the stuff, and it walks you through it really, really well. But still, my brain took to the melee a little bit quicker than it took to the arcane. That, for whatever reason, brain wasn't braining on that. If you or your opponent is getting ganged up on, let's say that I have 2 of my guys against 1 of my opponent's guys. The opponent is distracted, and so it suffers a -1 to the number of cards that it draws for its hand of melee. Then we have going for it, which is another way that you can spend energy outside of your regular activation sequence. So when you draw, after you draw your cards, but before you pick anything, each player can choose to spend 1 energy to draw 2 more cards. You can do that 1 time per round of melee. And then we have signature moves, which is where if each signature move will have a specific type that it is, so it'll be associated with a fallen swing or this or that. You can choose to upgrade your regular move of the particular type to the signature move, which will modify some of the numbers and usually give you a real cool kind of post-combat ability that happens with it. Or not ability, but trigger that happens with it. We then get a lot of pages of examples of the melee interactions, and then we get a chunk of lore, and then we get our scenarios. And I really like the way they did these. So there's 9 total scenarios, and they're broken up into little mini story scenarios. So each one is like a little mini chunk of a different story. So there's 3 total stories to go through, and there's a full page double column of the backstory and what's going on leading up to this for each and every part. So you get a big chunk of fluff for you and your opponent to read through to really get you into what's going on the board. After that, we come to the pages. So I guess if you don't have the cards, which the characters come with the cards when you get them, so unless you lose it, or if you just want to browse through and kind of see what stuff does before you purchase it. All the characters that I'm assuming that were released at the time of this printing are in here. The campaign book, which I also have over there on the shelf, we'll maybe talk about that another day. It also has, I think, all of these plus some, and then that's the rest of the book. So let's do some final thoughts on Moonstone from Goblin King Games. So there are some things that were hard for me to understand without seeing the game in action. And there are mainly just the sudden death thing is the only thing that I really don't care for. But again, we're gonna see how that goes. I'm definitely gonna keep playing the game because the combat and the arcane system, once I figured out how it worked, are an enormous amount of fun. They are very unique. I've personally not played a card-based game that works like that, where but I also haven't played an enormous number of card-based war games. I know that Malifaux is another big one in the space, and I actually have models for Malifaux, and I think the current edition of the rules, I just haven't gotten to it yet, but we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about Moonstone. So the game is a lot of fun, but it does have a somewhat costly price of entry. Or not price of entry, but price of expansion, let's say. So you can get a 2-player starter set for $105. Make sure it's bucks. Nope. Wait. Yes. $105 US will get you a 2-player starter set, which has 4 humans, 4 goblins, and then the rule book and the cards, right? Yep, you get the rule book, the melee deck, the arcane deck. I think it's the small size rule book, which I love that size. And that's a great deal. It's a great start. However, you need 6 models to play 2v2 properly, according to the book. Obviously, you can break that out and you can play that 4v4 with your buddies all day long and have an absolute blast. The booster packs, for the most part, come in groups of 3, except for the larger models, which are groups of 1. And they range from $33 to about $48. So, not cheap. But then again, if you're a completionist, this one might be tough. But if you're the type to just, I'm going to pick out the models that I like, that I want to play with, and we're going to go from there. Or if you just want to buy enough to add on to the Commonwealth and Dominion factions that you start with. And that's fair. I don't mind paying some money for some models. We've all done it for years. And that's okay. The models are beautiful. They're well sculpted. The details are crisp and very, very nice. I think the initial cost of entry is very fair. I think the cost of expansion is a bit steep for the number of models that you get. So I do think Moonstone is worth looking into if you've got some hobby budget free. I also think that Moonstone is fairly user-friendly. I think that it would be a fine game for a fledgling wargamer all the way up to an advanced wargamer. Thanks so much for tuning in, hanging out, letting me talk to you about Moonstone for a little bit. I hope you have an absolutely amazing rest of your day.